forward, work together with compassionate hearts, because that one simple act is the reason why I am here today, compassion. My story begins with my parents. My father, First Nation from the United States. My mother, a Caucasian Canadian citizen. They were living on a reserve in the United States when my mother spoke out against the corruption that she saw in the Bureau of Indian Affairs. The Bureau of Indian Affairs officer then retaliated by threatening to take me away the day I was born and placed me in a church-run foster home and school. My father knew all too well the horrors of these places. He bore the scars for being whipped daily, just to try for holding on to his culture and his language. Out of fear for me, their unborn child, they fled back to Canada. My father followed. I was born somewhere along the way in Guelph, on the way to Guelph. To try and protect me, they chose not to register my birth. In 1954, they knew all too well children were taken away simply for being Indian. By not registering me with the government of Canada, my parents committed a sin that I have had to pay for all my life. When I was 5 years old, I realized my parents' fears were real, that we were different. I started to understand the words that people said about us, and it hurt. My father was not a dog. My mother was not a harlot for loving him. And I certainly was not a half-breed mutt. The hate came at us from all sides, English and Native, because we were different. At 15, I left home. I walked away and never returned. Through the years, I tried unsuccessfully to obtain ID and resolve my status, only to have one of three things happen. The first, silence. Never return a call, nothing. The second, most common, was, sorry, there's nothing I can do for you. And that was it. And the third, my favorite, why don't you go back to where you came from and enter Canada legally? And it was always put more of a statement than a question. But how do you immigrate to a country where you were born from when no one will help you? In January of 2014, I was dying from heart failure. Unable to obtain health care, proper medical attention, I knew I was going to die. So I got on the internet, desperate to find someone, anyone, that could help me. After a lifetime of being told sorry, I needed a miracle, plain and simple. I found that miracle on the internet, on the website for the Lost Canadians. I thought to myself, what the hell? At this point, I've got nothing less to lose. So I wrote Mr. Don Chapman. As I pressed send, I thought, well, here's to nothing. But to my surprise, the next morning, Don Chapman called me. Those of you who know Don, he's a bull in a china shop. He speaks 100 miles an hour and he's crazy, but he's the perfect kind of crazy of what I needed. I don't remember much of what he said in the beginning of the conversation, but I remember the end. He said, I don't know how, and I don't know how long it takes, but I will not give up on you until you are a Canadian. I hung up the phone for the first time in my life, and I had hope. His compassion, I heard through the line on the phone, and it was real. 2 weeks later, I suffered a heart attack that should have killed me, but it didn't. I was flown to Vancouver where a first-generation Canadian immigrant doctor knew what it meant to be stateless. And he went against the rules. He did everything he could to save my life. Again, compassion ruled. For the next year, Don screamed my story to everyone who would listen. Along the way, we found others like myself. The first person Don introduced me to was Heather Harnwell. Heather is an amazing and intelligent First Nations woman who is also fighting for her status in Canada. Through Don, APTN Investigates ran a news article on Heather and I. The story generated outrage in the First Nations community of my home territory of the Yukon. They flooded my MP's office with phone calls to the point that they stopped answering the phone. Unfortunately, my MP chose to tell me the third way. Go back where you came from. They never returned my emails or my calls after. Don never let up. He screamed from the mountains for all to hear. Finally, CIC contacted me via email. After 2 months of explaining my situation, they informed me I needed to apply for citizenship under Section 5.4 of the Citizenship Act on humanitarian and compassionate grounds. But there are no official forms for Section 5.4. There is no department that handles Section 5.4. I had to fill out a standard citizenship form and provide all the information that I could provide, which isn't much. After a lifetime of moving and wandering, because what's the point of settling down when I can't? I have no rights. I was about to send all the paperwork that I had into CIC when Don said to me, "Donovan, I don't feel comfortable with this. I feel like I'm sending a dog up against a pack of wolves." I said to Don, "Don't worry, I know about wolves. We just need big dogs." I sent my application to CIC, and I waited, and I waited. Finally, they sent me a letter saying they needed more information, but offered no details as to what they needed. And I had 30 days to comply. I was at a loss. I had no idea what to do. So Don sent out the call, and my dog pack came together. The people that he brought in are some of the best people that Canada can have. They're the most compassionate people. And I am humbled, even to this day, over their compassion and how they helped me. Jackie Scott, Peg Bosdet, Robert Addington, Fred Colburn, Heather Harnwell, and Jocelyn Kane. They came to my rescue. But we still needed more because we had no idea how to proceed. Then came the big dog, Kevin Drews of the Canadian Press. He had the bark that could make everybody listen. And his story that he ran on me went around the world, and it made people listen. Through Kevin's article, the final piece that I needed, the final big dog I needed. Actually, she's an angel. She's my guardian angel, Michelle Quigg from Access Pro Bono. She tried to find me legal representation, but quickly found out that citizenship law is just too damn hard to understand, and nobody wanted to touch it. So she stepped up to the challenge. The first thing she did was file an extension because I had 1 day left to file the paperwork with CIC, and I had nothing because I had no idea. She filed for the extension and it was granted. Once again, compassion ruled. Michelle and I spent the next 30 days working our tails off. There were many late nights to gather up all the information. She helped guide me through what I needed. On May 21st, 2015, I received a call from CIC telling me to go to the Service Canada office in Dawson City to take my oath of citizenship. It was my wife, my best friend, and my children, and the lady who administered the oath to me I had known for years. She had to hold back her tears while she recited the oath for me. She was so happy. After 61 years of being worth less than a dog, I was finally human. Best of all, I was a Canadian citizen. You think my troubles would have been over then once I got my citizenship certificate. But unfortunately, the law is the law in Canada. You need 2 forms of identification. So I applied for my health care card and a general identification card, but was rejected because I could not provide additional identification. I have no birth certificate. I never will. We need to come up with a better way than that. Not reluctantly, enthusiastically, the Premier of the Yukon, after reading my affidavit, and the Minister of Health agreed. They issued me the documents just in time. A week later, I suffered yet another heart attack. The time has come to end statelessness in Canada, now. We know the problems existed for ages. We know what needs to be done to help these people. Now, we must work together, all of us, everyone. We must let compassion rule our hearts and our minds. These are people that need our help. They're not dogs to be thrown away. As far as I know, I'm the only stateless person to gain official status in Canada. This is simply unacceptable. Official records of Canada list the number of stateless people as 0. I beg to differ. We're hidden in plain sight. Canada has a new wave of stateless children getting ready to come of age. These are the children of such movements as the free man on the land and sovereign citizens. Like my parents, these people chose not to register their children, except they did it out of defiance of the government. Now, as these children come of age and try desperately to escape their parents' ideology, they're trapped. The main difference between these children and myself is, when they come looking for help, I will be there. Will you? Thank you.
Folks are having ongoing. can just talk.
Do you want to?
Yeah, I can just talk. Might as well.
Feel okay? Okay.
Hello?
That works.
I was born in Tucson, Arizona, at home, and I wasn't registered. There was a huge scandal at the time in Arizona going around about Child Protective Services there, CPS. They were taking babies away from low-income families, specifically single mothers, and they were selling them for adoption. And there was a 6-year waiting list for white babies at the time. And some pretty awful people would be buying these kids. And so she had to escape somehow because they were basically harassing her. They kept coming over trying to look for excuses to take me away from her. So she met up with someone who said had family in Canada and promised to take care of her there. And it was before 9/11, so border security wasn't that good. So they just threw a blanket over me and drove across the border. And I ended up in Canada. Once they got to Canada, things didn't work out between her and this guy, and she ended up alone in Canada with no money, with a baby. So, we were in a pretty bad situation. I was 2 years old, and we were basically eating out of garbage cans. So she had to give me to whoever was willing to take care of me. So I got passed around between a few different families, and then when I was 2 years old, they found family that was willing to take me permanently. And so she left me there. She wanted to take me back to the States, but she knew she couldn't take care of me. Anyways, I lived with this family until I was 12 years old. When they first got me, they tried to go through the process of getting me legally adopted, but without a birth certificate, that's pretty much impossible. And there was an attempt to deport me when I was 3 years old, I believe it was, because different officers that knew that I was in Canada thought my adopted parents just weren't trying hard enough. I was 3 years old, and they wanted to deport me, and they found that they couldn't send me anywhere because I had no proof that I was born in the States. Because I could have been born in China for all the evidence anyone had. So when I was 12 years old, that family broke down, and they got divorced, and we all went our separate ways. So I moved in with some friends and was able to get into school. I was homeschooled previously, and it was a really small town. So it wasn't, everyone knew my situation, so it wasn't a big deal. I made it through high school. Obviously I wasn't able to get a driver's license or anything. I made it in post-secondary. I'm a third-year electrical apprentice. But it's extremely difficult to move ahead in life. Even if you are able to get into school, you're going through school and you're thinking to yourself this whole time, why am I even in school? I'm not going to be able to work when I get older. What opportunities do I have? And especially in trying to find employers to hire you, it is extremely hard. If you're lucky, you'll be able to find short-term, small contracting companies that will hire you. I've been fairly lucky in that aspect, but it's extremely difficult, and I've struggled a lot with it. And obviously, just basic things I can't get. I can't get a social insurance number. I can't get a driver's license. I can't get a care card. You can't even get a hotel room by yourself because they need ID. You can't get a plane ticket. You can't get things like a Costco card, Save-On card. You can't get a passport, obviously. You're basically stuck in this box, and you can't get out. And it's just weird growing up in school, and you know, we're in an age where we're supposed to treat everyone equally. It doesn't matter if you're male or female, black or white. And you know, going to school and learning all this stuff, and you're the one exception to the rule. You know, it's okay to treat you differently, you know, less than an animal basically, because of the situation you were born into. You know, just, you know, it's hard to go through, definitely. And my current situation, you know, there's been, I didn't just crawl out from Iraq a couple years ago. There have been people, many government officials that I've known. I've been in Canada since I was 2 years old. There's been, you know, roughly 5 attempts to get me a delayed birth certificate. There's been many officials, Canadian officials, that officers that tried to get documents from Arizona and tried to push me through the system. And, you know, it just doesn't work without a birth certificate or any documents. Even when my permanent residency was accepted on humanitarian and compassionate grounds, you would think that you have permanent residency after that. But you know, you still need to provide a birth certificate and a valid passport. So here I get this letter in the mail saying, you know, you're accepted under humanitarian and compassionate grounds. Now, you know, let's see your birth certificate and your valid passport. You know, it's ridiculous. So even, you know, systems in place that seem like they're there to help you, you know, a lot of them aren't really super helpful if they still require you to have ID, and at least not helpful for stateless people. So yeah, when I was about 17 years old, we finally got a hold of my member of parliament. It was one of the better decisions that was made. It was very helpful. They're the ones who got the first half of my permanent residency accepted. And then eventually, as years went by, it turned out my permanent residency was stuck and I wasn't moving anywhere because I didn't have a birth certificate. I Googled stateless people in Canada, and I saw Donovan's story. And I typed in Donovan's name on Facebook and sent him a message. And he got me in contact with Don Chapman and Michelle Quigg. And because of them, I'm almost a permanent resident, hopefully really soon. So it's looking hopeful, but you know, I don't want to jinx myself or anything. Yeah. Is there anything else we should talk about? That's good? Okay. Anything else?
I joked with him yesterday night and I said, well, worst case scenario, you will have to present it. Michelle, that's your turn.
So I'm, as was mentioned, I'm Michelle Quigg. I work for a nonprofit organization in BC called Access Pro Bono, which seeks to improve access to justice for people who can't afford justice, specifically people who can't afford lawyers. And as you've heard from, and I represent Donovan and Kia, and as you've heard so powerfully from both of them, their struggles to get status in Canada has really been an exercise of frustration, cycle upon cycle of futility, catch-22s. It's very difficult. Prior to working on their cases, I did not have a citizenship law experience. My professional experience was limited to refugee claims and immigration matters such as spousal sponsorship applications, humanitarian and compassionate ground applications, fraud, pre-removal risk assessment, those sorts of applications. So I was very green coming into this myself. Today, I'd like to share with you what it is lawyering, being a lawyer in this stateless context, and what I've learned through my experiences of working on both Donovan and Kia's cases, and hopefully provide some productive recommendations of improvements that can be made. So the main things that I've learned are, one, Canada's citizenship legislation is beyond confusing. Since I had no citizenship experience, I said, okay, I'm going to start. I'm going to read the Citizenship Act. I'm a lawyer. I'm legally trained to read and interpret statute. I was so confused. It's like, please see section so-and-so, subsection 1 refers to back this, and you just end up with this huge headache. So it's really even hard to understand what the laws with regards to citizenship are in this country. The other thing I learned is that for stateless people, there are so many process-related barriers. So even though there are some of these helpful legal instruments like international treaties and the very few mechanisms that Andrew mentioned, such as the Section 5.4 special and unusual hardship provision of the Citizenship Act, or for people like in Kia's situation, humanitarian and compassionate grounds applications, the particularities of being stateless and the lack of documents inherent in that for many people create many barriers, making these difficult avenues to navigate. The other thing I learned that being a lawyer for stateless clients, it's often largely an exercise in how do you make something out of nothing. For lawyers, what we're professional document gatherers and professional process navigators. That's what we do. But what do you do when your client doesn't have any documents? What do you do when there is no defined process, or the process that is there, such as Section 5.4, is really nebulous? And like Donovan mentioned, there's no prescribed form to fill out. There's no steps that are prescribed for you to follow. If I do a refugee claim, I know what I have to prove. I have to prove persecution on a certain number of enumerated grounds in the Refugee Convention. I have to prove that my client can't get protection in their home country, and I have to prove that there's nowhere else in their home country that they can go. I know this. This is the roadmap. With statelessness, there is no roadmap like that when you're lawyering, so it is difficult. So a lot of it is trying to make something out of nothing, or limited what you have, and then convincing CIC, now IRCC, Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada, that what you have is enough to prove that this person is deserving of citizenship. And lastly, the thing that I learned is that these cases take a village. It's not just the lawyer. Both Donovan and Kia have mentioned it takes huge involvement from the clients themselves. They've worked so hard themselves, providing tons of documents, affidavits, doing their best. Their communities stepping up, writing letters of support to prove their establishment in these communities for years and years. Kia's school principal, who drove him all the way from BC and who's been involved in his case for years. Don Chapman of The Last Canadians, who has been advocating tirelessly for these people, keeping their cases on the agenda, and also the media. And I think that media attention has been really helpful in their cases. And when you hear these horror stories of people in detention, one of the reasons I like the media on my clients' cases is I feel it can be sometimes a bit of a safeguard that at least people are watching, although as we've seen in many cases, it's not enough of a safeguard. So in terms of, I'm going to get into sort of the